The morning sun poured through the tall windows of the courthouse, its rays bouncing off the polished wooden floors and illuminating the grandiose chandeliers that hung from the ceiling. The scent of polished wood mixed with the faint, lingering aroma of coffee from the judge's chambers. A steady hum of anticipation filled the air, growing louder with every passing minute as people filtered into the courtroom. It wasn't just any trial. It was a high-profile criminal case that had gripped the city for weeks. The media had dubbed it the case that won't quit, and the tension surrounding it was palpable. People whispered quietly as they took their seats, some craning their necks to glimpse the defendant, a man in his early 40s, whose reputation alone seemed to fill the room with unease. His posture was rigid, eyes darting around the courtroom, a mask of indifference over the anxious tension that only a few could detect. Lawyers shuffled papers and adjusted their ties, their polished shoes scraping lightly across the floor, as they prepared for what would be a long and grueling day. The judge, a woman known for her strict adherence to protocol and her calm, commanding presence, sat at the bench, her gavel resting beside her. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowd, ensuring that everyone who was supposed to be there was, and that those who weren't stayed out. In a corner of the courtroom, near the gallery reserved for witnesses and family members, a small figure sat quietly, her legs dangling above the floor. She was no older than 6, with curly brown hair that framed her round face, clutched tightly. In her small hands was a faded stuffed rabbit, its once white fur now tinged with gray from years of comfort. Her eyes, wide and alert, followed every movement in the courtroom with a focus that seemed unusual for someone her age. Beside her sat her guardian, a middle-aged woman whose hand rested protectively over the girl's tiny fingers. She whispered gentle reassurances now and then, sensing the nervous energy that radiated from the child. The room slowly settled as the clerk announced the judge's entrance. A hush fell over the courtroom as the heavy doors swung open and the judge walked in, her robe flowing gracefully behind her. Her presence commanded immediate respect. Murmurs faded into silence, and the shuffling of papers stopped. With a calm, authoritative voice, she called the court to order, the sound of her gavel cutting through the stillness like a hammer striking steel. The trial was officially underway. The prosecution, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp features and a reputation for thorough preparation, rose to her feet. She began outlining the case, her voice steady, measured, and persuasive. She spoke of the crime, the evidence gathered, and the testimonies she intended to present. Every word seemed to land with precision, echoing off the courtroom walls and drawing the jury further into the narrative. The defense attorney, an older man with silver-streaked hair and a calm demeanor, responded with equal intensity. He questioned assumptions, dissected every piece of evidence, and tried to sow seeds of doubt, all while maintaining a composed exterior. As the arguments continued, the little girl shifted slightly in her seat, her gaze drifting from the judge to the defendant, and then to a corner of the courtroom where a black and tan police canine had just entered. The dog moved with an elegance and discipline that immediately drew attention. Its handler, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard, guided the animal to a designated spot near the evidence table. The canine sat obediently, ears perked and eyes scanning the room with intelligent focus. Even the most hardened spectators couldn't help but notice the dog's presence. It was as if an unseen force of awareness had entered the courtroom alongside it. The prosecution paused briefly to explain the canine's role in the investigation. Trained in scent detection and evidence location, the dog had been instrumental in uncovering critical leads at the scene of the crime. Jurors leaned forward, intrigued, their curiosity mixing with a sense of awe. The defense watched with subtle apprehension, knowing that the dog's actions could tip the scales in ways that human testimony alone might not. The judge nodded, allowing the canine to remain in the courtroom as part of the official proceedings. Meanwhile, the little girl's attention never wavered from the dog. Her small fingers clutched the stuffed rabbit tightly, knuckles white with tension. She whispered something to her guardian, but no one else heard it. Her gaze seemed to hold a mixture of fear and certainty, a strange awareness that belied her age. Those who glanced at her quickly assumed she was simply overwhelmed by the environment, but there was a quiet intensity in her eyes that suggested otherwise. She was waiting, watching, and in her own small way, preparing for a moment that no one else in the room could predict. The courtroom settled into a rhythm as lawyers began presenting technical evidence photographs, witness accounts, and forensic reports. The jurors scribbled notes diligently, trying to follow the sometimes complicated details. The air was heavy, with concentration, punctuated occasionally by the rustle of papers or the soft tapping of shoes against the floor. Everyone was focused on the human aspects of the trial, testimony, motive, and evidence. Nobody suspected that the smallest witness present might one day redirect all attention, changing the narrative in a way that no adult could anticipate. As the morning progressed, the tension built like a taut wire ready to snap. The prosecutor carefully walked the jury through the timeline of events, highlighting inconsistencies in witness accounts and pointing to evidence that suggested culpability. The defense countered, questioning the reliability of witnesses and suggesting alternative explanations. The exchanges grew increasingly intense, and the courtroom audience leaned forward collectively, caught in the ebb and flow of argument and counter-argument. In a quiet corner, the little girl shifted in her seat again. Her eyes found the K9, and for the first time, she whispered a single word under her breath. It was barely audible, a tiny murmur lost amid the proceedings. But the guardian noticed, her eyes widening in surprise. The girl's demeanor had changed slightly. There was a calmness, a focus, that made her presence more than just a passive observation. The K9, as if responding to something imperceptible, lifted its ears and tilted its head slightly. By noon, the courtroom had become a theater of tension and quiet anticipation. Everyone was absorbed in the trial, yet a subtle undercurrent hinted that something extraordinary might occur. The child's presence, the K9's disciplined attention, and the mounting complexity of the case all combined into an almost tangible sense of expectation. Even the judge, seasoned and unflappable, occasionally glanced at the little girl and the dog with mild curiosity, sensing that the ordinary rules of courtroom procedure might not account for what was about to unfold. Spectators whispered quietly, among themselves, exchanging theories about the crime and speculation about the trial's outcome. Lawyers paused occasionally to adjust their notes or confer with colleagues. The little girl remained still, absorbing every sound, every movement, every flicker of expression. She seemed almost detached from the chaos, yet deeply engaged in what she had seen and understood. It was a strange juxtaposition, a child in a room full of adults, yet somehow possessing an awareness that many of the adults lacked. As the morning session drew to a close, a brief pause allowed everyone to stretch and regroup. The K9 remained seated, calm and alert, a silent observer of the human drama surrounding it. The girl clutched her stuffed rabbit a little tighter, her gaze fixed firmly on the dog. Something had shifted in the courtroom, though no one could yet define it. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface now crackled with subtle intensity, a foreshadowing of events that would soon unfold in a way no one could anticipate. And then, as the judge prepared to call the next witness, the little girl's lips parted. No one could have predicted that two small words, uttered by a voice so young and seemingly fragile, would soon freeze the entire courtroom. The anticipation hung in the air, heavy and electric, as though the room itself had sensed the approaching storm. The doors at the far end of the courtroom creaked open again, this time to announce the arrival of something or someone different. Not a witness, not another lawyer, not even a bailiff, but a black and tan police canine named Rex, the dog's handler, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp uniform, guided him through the wooden doors with a mixture of discipline and quiet pride. The courtroom, already tense from the morning's proceedings, seemed to hold its breath. People whispered, some leaning forward instinctively, as though sensing that this animal's presence might be more than symbolic. Rex's paws clicked lightly against the polished floors, echoing in the large chamber. The dog moved with a precision that only comes from years of training, each step deliberate, controlled, and purposeful. His muscles rippled beneath his shiny coat as he walked, ears perked, eyes scanning every corner of the room. Jurors and spectators alike couldn't take their eyes off him. He wasn't just a dog. He was a sentinel of truth, a living instrument of law, and somehow, in the stillness of the courtroom, everyone felt that they were witnessing something rare. The handler guided Rex to a spot near the evidence table, just a few feet from where the lawyers were seated. Rex sat down, his posture perfect, tail wrapped neatly beside him. His gaze was steady, alert, and unblinking, scanning the room with intelligence that seemed almost human. A murmur ran through the spectators. Some leaned toward each other and whispered, "Is that really allowed in court?" Others merely stared, captivated. Even the defendant, who had until now appeared stoic and detached, shifted slightly in his chair, eyes narrowing on the dog with a flicker of unease. The prosecutor, sensing the interest in the room, rose to her feet. Her sharp heels clicked against the floor as she moved toward the jury. She gestured to Rex and began explaining the dog's role in the investigation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice calm but carrying the weight of authority, "Rex here has been instrumental. In this case, he has located evidence that would have otherwise remained hidden. He's trained to detect scents, identify items related to the crime, and alert his handlers to critical details. In essence, he has helped us uncover pieces of the truth that might have otherwise gone unnoticed." Jurors leaned forward, intrigued. They had all heard of police dogs before, but never in a courtroom setting during a high-profile trial. There was something mesmerizing about the presence of this animal in such a solemn, formal environment. A defense attorney seated across the aisle shifted slightly in his chair, subtle apprehension flickering across his features. The dog's capabilities were undeniable, and any display of instinctual knowledge could dramatically influence the jury's perception. Rex's handler gave a slight nod, signaling the dog to remain still. Rex obeyed, sitting with perfect discipline. Yet every muscle in his body seemed alive, ready to respond to a command or perhaps, as some in the room silently wondered, to respond to something unseen. The little girl in the corner, clutching her stuffed rabbit, watched intently. Her eyes followed the dog with an intensity that belied her age. She seemed to understand something others did not, that Rex was not just part of the trial, but a participant in a silent conversation with the truth. As the morning dragged on, the canine remained focused. The lawyers continued presenting evidence, but the dog's presence added a layer of unspoken tension. Each time a photograph or piece of evidence was placed on the table, Rex's ears twitched slightly. Occasionally, he would shift his weight, pivot, or even let out a subtle whine and noise, so quiet that only those closest could hear it. Spectators craned their necks to see, and murmurs began to circulate. Was the dog reacting to something hidden? Could he sense something the humans had overlooked? The prosecutor walked toward the evidence table and displayed a small, sealed envelope. She explained that this contained a critical piece of forensic evidence connected to the case. "Rex has already located this at the scene," she said, her voice calm but filled with purpose. "Without his assistance, It might have gone undiscovered for months. She carefully placed the envelope on the table in front of the dog. Rex's eyes flicked to it. A faint shift in his posture, imperceptible to most, hinted at recognition. Across the courtroom, the defense attorney whispered to his client, the defendant, who leaned forward slightly, tension evident in his posture. "Do you see that?" he muttered. "Even a dog knows something we don't." The implication sent a ripple through the courtroom. People began to realize that this trial was no longer just about human testimony and documents. It had transformed into a complex dance of instinct, intelligence, and observation. Meanwhile, the little girl continued to observe quietly. She whispered something under her breath, just audible enough for her guardian to catch. "He's the one." Her small hand clutched the stuffed rabbit tighter. Her gaze never wavered from Rex, and for the first time, she straightened in her chair, her body language exuding an uncharacteristic confidence. The guardian, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding, allowed her to continue watching, neither interrupting nor correcting her. Rex tilted his head slightly, a gesture so subtle that many in the room didn't notice it at first. But to the little girl, it was a signal of recognition. She exhaled slowly, a tiny smile forming on her lips. It was as if she knew, with complete certainty, that this dog understood the same truth she had seen the night of the incident. A hush fell over the courtroom. The murmurs subsided, replaced by an almost tangible anticipation. Something significant was about to occur. The judge, observing the courtroom, remained calm but perceptive. She had presided over hundreds of trials, but even she sensed the unusual tension in the air. A child and a dog, two seemingly innocent presences, had shifted the focus of an entire courtroom. She made a subtle note to herself. Pay close attention. Something was about to challenge the assumptions everyone had relied upon. The prosecution decided to demonstrate Rex's abilities in real time. With the handler's guidance, the dog approached the evidence table, sniffing carefully around the envelope, photographs, and other objects. His movements were precise, deliberate, and intentional. The spectators leaned forward, holding their breath. Jurors scribbled notes furiously, unsure if what they were witnessing was standard procedure or a pivotal revelation. Every movement Rex made seemed to carry significance, every tilt of his head a silent commentary on the unfolding trial. Then, in a subtle but noticeable shift, Rex's posture changed. His ears perked sharply, and his tail flicked slightly. He approached the envelope, sniffed it meticulously, and then pawed at it once. The courtroom erupted in quiet astonishment. The prosecutor nodded approvingly, while the defense attorney's face tightened, a flicker of worry crossing his features. This was no longer just a display. It was confirmation that the K9 was reacting to evidence tied directly to the crime. The little girl's eyes widened. Her tiny lips parted, and she pointed at Rex. Her guardian held her hand tightly, but allowed her to continue observing. The intensity in her gaze was mesmerizing. She had seen something crucial, something that adults had missed. And now, with Rex reacting to the evidence in a way that mirrored her observation, it became clear that her insight might hold the key to unraveling the entire case. The courtroom's atmosphere grew electric. Spectators whispered in disbelief. Jurors leaned forward with wide eyes, and even the judge, composed and experienced, felt the weight of the moment. Lawyers paused, realizing that the interplay between the child and the dog could dramatically influence the perception of the case. Every eye was now fixed on Rex and the little girl, the silent exchange between them more captivating than any testimony or piece of evidence presented that morning. By the time the morning session neared its conclusion, a quiet understanding settled over the room. This trial had shifted. The presence of Rex, combined with the observant young witness, had introduced an element no one could have predicted. The case was no longer solely about human evidence and legal arguments. Instinct, observation, and intelligence beyond words were now intertwined in the pursuit of truth. As the judge called for a short recess, Rex remained seated, calm but alert, his eyes scanning the room as if acknowledging the silent weight of his role. The little girl held her stuffed rabbit tightly, her gaze unwavering, sensing that this was only the beginning. The courtroom buzzed with speculation and anticipation. Everyone understood, even if only subconsciously, that the events of the afternoon would likely be historic, forever remembered as the day when a child and a dog altered the course of justice together. The courtroom had settled into a peculiar rhythm after the K-9's entrance. Lawyers moved with measured precision, presenting evidence and arguing points of law, but the energy of the room had shifted. Eyes that had once rested solely on legal proceedings now flitted between a small corner of the gallery and the disciplined, black Inton K-9 stationed near the evidence table. In that corner sat a little girl, no more than 6 years old, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit. Her brown curls framed a face that was unnervingly still, yet her wide eyes radiated a focus far beyond her years. Her guardian, a middle-aged woman named Helen, shifted in her seat, keeping a protective hand over the child's small one. She whispered occasional reassurances, though the little girl seemed remarkably composed. Today, she would be called to testify. The notion of a 6-year-old providing credible courtroom testimony might have seemed absurd to anyone else, but those who knew her understood something unique. This child, Emily, had witnessed the night of the incident in a way that no adult could fully comprehend. She had seen, heard, and remembered, and she carried a memory that would soon alter the course of the trial. The bailiff approached, and with a gentle voice, called Emily forward. The spectators leaned in slightly. Curiosity mingled with skepticism. Could a child really have any impact on a trial of this magnitude? A judge, seasoned and meticulous, gestured for her to take the witness stand. Emily's small feet made soft thuds against the polished floor as she walked forward, her stuffed rabbit clutched firmly against her chest. The courtroom seemed to grow quieter with every step she took, as though acknowledging the weight of her presence. Once she reached the stand, the bailiff helped her settle onto the small chair designed for children, placing a step stool under her feet to ensure she could sit comfortably. Emily glanced briefly at the K-9 Rex, who remained seated with unwavering focus near the evidence table. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and a flicker of recognition passed between them. Helen whispered, "You can do this," and squeezed her hand gently. Emily inhaled deeply, her small chest rising and falling as she prepared to speak. The prosecution, a sharp-featured woman named Marla, approached with a reassuring smile. "Emily," she said softly, crouching slightly so her voice was at the child's level, "we just need you to tell us what you saw that night. Take your time and tell the truth, okay?" Emily nodded solemnly, her grip on the stuffed rabbit tightening. Marla returned to her position near the jury, ready to guide the questioning with patience and precision. The courtroom fell into an expectant hush. Spectators shifted in their seats, attorneys exchanged subtle glances, and even the defendant's eyes flicked toward the little witness. Emily's testimony would be brief, but everyone sensed its potential significance. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, a tension so thick it could almost be touched. It wasn't just the content of her testimony that intrigued the room, it was her presence itself. Here was a child, vulnerable in age, yet undeniably aware, stepping into a chamber, full of adults whose lives and judgments relied on the smallest details of truth. Emily took a deep breath. "I saw him," she said, her voice quiet but clear. The room paused, hanging on her words. The judge leaned slightly forward, and even Rex tilted his head slightly, ears pricked. Marla nodded encouragingly. "Who?" "Did you see, Emily?" she asked gently. The child's small finger pointed toward the defendant, her lips parting once more. "Him," she said simply. The simplicity of the statement belied the magnitude of its impact. The defense attorney, Mr. Whitman, stood and approached cautiously, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Emily," he said softly, "are you sure? Can you remember what happened clearly?" The girl's wide eyes met his, unblinking, unwavering. "I saw him," she repeated, her voice slightly firmer this time. The courtroom murmured. The tension had escalated. A child's observation, so direct and unambiguous, was suddenly a force no one could ignore. Marla asked Emily to describe what she saw that night. The little girl's words were slow and deliberate. She recounted fragments, shadows, sounds, and movements. She described a flash of anger, a loud noise, and then the man's figure leaving a darkened room. Her recollection was vivid, detailed in ways that only someone who had truly observed an event could produce. The jury leaned forward collectively, captivated. Even the judge's stoic expression softened slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that this testimony was unusual in both clarity and significance. Emily's attention kept returning to Rex. She squinted at him occasionally, as if checking whether he understood what she had seen. Her small lips moved slightly, whispering words. So quiet they were almost imperceptible. "He knows." Helen noticed and stiffened, her heart racing. The words had weight, though no one else yet grasped their meaning. Rex's ears twitched. The canine seemed to acknowledge the tiny, whispered proclamation, tilting his head in a way that suggested recognition, understanding, or perhaps confirmation. Marla gently encouraged Emily to continue. "Can you tell us where he went after that?" The child paused, brow furrowed, recalling the night with remarkable precision. She spoke of a path through the back hallway, a hidden alcove, and a place where she had first noticed the scent of fear, confusion, and an object that had been dropped. Her memory was almost photographic in its detail. The jury scribbled notes furiously, trying to capture every nuance. The courtroom was silent, but for the girl's voice and the occasional subtle sound from Rex, whose body language mirrored her focus and intent. Whitman attempted to undermine her memory. "Emily, it's been a long time. Are you sure your memory isn't mixed up?" But the girl's response was immediate. "No, I saw it," she said, eyes narrowing slightly, her voice steady. The courtroom gasped quietly. Here was a child, unflinching in the face of cross-examination, asserting her memory with authority. Witnesses had come and gone with less conviction, yet Emily's clarity and determination drew attention from everyone present. The defendant shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his confident composure beginning to crack. He exchanged worried glances with Whitman, realizing that the testimony of this small child could alter the entire trial. Spectators whispered quietly among themselves. Cameras in the back of the courtroom captured every moment, framing the little girl as the unexpected pivot point of a case that had captivated the city for weeks. Even the press, trained to expect drama and spectacle, seemed struck by the seriousness and poise of such a young witness. Marla gently guided Emily to the evidence table, pointing to the sealed envelope Rex had already signaled. "Emily, do you see anything familiar here?" The child's eyes widened, and she slowly extended her small finger toward the object. She whispered, almost inaudibly, the two words that would soon echo in the memories of everyone present. "He knows." The courtroom froze. Every eye turned to her. Every person leaned forward, sensing the gravity of what had just been spoken. Even Rex shifted slightly, acknowledging the statement as though confirming its truth. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Witnesses, attorneys, jurors, and spectators were united in a rare collective pause, a moment where a child's words carried more weight than any legal argument or forensic report. Helen's grip on Emily's hand tightened, but she allowed the girl to continue observing. She had known that Emily possessed a unique awareness, but witnessing it in action was something extraordinary. The prosecution exchanged a glance with the K9 handler. The dog's reactions had always been methodical and precise, but combined with Emily's testimony, they now formed a subtle yet undeniable confirmation of events that had remained obscured until that moment. The judge, composed yet clearly attentive, allowed the pause to settle over the courtroom. She understood the unusual circumstances, how the testimony of a child, combined with the instincts of a trained K9, had introduced a dynamic that could alter the course of the trial. The courtroom's energy was a blend of awe, disbelief, and anticipation. Every person present instinctively understood that they were witnessing something rare, a convergence of innocence and instinct, perception and intelligence, that was challenging conventional expectations of courtroom procedure. Emily's focus remained unwavering. She whispered a few additional details, small, seemingly trivial observations, that were in fact critical to understanding the full scope of the incident. Her recollection included the location of objects, movements of people, and even subtle sounds that had occurred that night. The precision of her memory was astounding. Jurors scribbled furiously, attempting to capture her every word. Attorneys leaned closer, realizing that each detail might carry legal significance beyond what they had anticipated. By the end of her testimony, the courtroom was silent, absorbing the weight of her words. Emily returned to her seat beside Helen, clutching her stuffed rabbit and exhaling quietly. The K9 remained poised near the evidence table, a silent guardian of truth. Everyone present, from the judge to the journalists, understood that the trial had entered a new phase 1, where adult assumptions were challenged, and the perspectives of the smallest witnesses carried profound consequences. And in that quiet, tense atmosphere, a realization settled over the room. Sometimes, the smallest voices can reveal the most significant truths, and the innocence of a child, paired with the instincts of a loyal companion, could hold the key to justice in ways no one had imagined. After Emily returned to her seat, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit, the courtroom seemed to enter a strange interlude. It wasn't silence exactly, but a quiet suspended in tension, as if the entire room collectively held its breath. Lawyers shuffled papers hesitantly, unsure whether to proceed or pause to process what had just occurred. The jurors leaned back in their chairs, eyes wide, notebooks forgotten for a moment, staring at the little girl and the black and tan K9 stationed a few feet away near the evidence table. Even the judge, usually unflappable, allowed herself a subtle moment of reflection, her sharp eyes narrowing as she studied the scene. The moment felt unreal. A child's testimony, delivered with poise and clarity, combined with a dog's intuitive responses, had shifted the energy of the courtroom. It was a convergence of innocence, instinct, and truth that seemed almost otherworldly. People whispered softly among themselves, unable to contain their astonishment. The spectators' fascination was evident. Parents leaned forward, silently, nodding in admiration, while students scribbled notes furiously, trying to capture the extraordinary dynamics at play. Emily's gaze remained fixed on Rex, the K9. The dog sat perfectly poised, muscles taut yet relaxed, tail gently sweeping the floor with subtle precision. His ears twitched intermittently, as though he could sense things beyond human perception. The child's eyes mirrored a similar intensity, and for a few moments, the courtroom felt like it existed in a space apart from ordinary time, a quiet charged interval where attention was suspended, and anticipation hung heavy in the air. Helen, Emily's guardian, whispered softly into her ear, "You did very well." Emily's small hand gripped hers tighter, as if grounding herself in the familiarity of comfort. But her gaze never wavered from Rex. There was a silent understanding. Between them, an invisible connection that defied logic. People in the courtroom couldn't see it, but the child's observation and the dog's instincts seemed to align, forming a subtle yet undeniable dialogue. It was as if the two of them shared knowledge that the rest of the room could only glimpse. From the periphery, the defense attorney Whitman moved cautiously, trying to regain control of the narrative. He approached the evidence table slowly, watching Rex closely. The dog's calm, measured breathing and poised stance created a subtle unease in Whitman. He cleared his throat, attempting to project confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the jury, voice steady, "it's important to remember that what a child perceives may not always be accurate. Memories can be fragile, especially at such a young age." A few spectators nodded, but the tension in the room made the words feel hollow. Emily's testimony had already left an impression, and the quiet intensity of her focus on Rex made Whitman's logic seem insufficient. The K9's presence, combined with the clarity of her observations, created a silent challenge to his argument. The room seemed to lean forward collectively, anticipating the next move. Aware that this was not a normal day in court, Marla, the prosecutor, rose again, her sharp heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. She approached the jury with a calm but purposeful demeanor. "Rex is trained to detect evidence and respond to cues," she said. "He doesn't guess, he reacts. And his reactions so far have aligned perfectly with the observations of a witness, who is not only truthful but remarkably perceptive. This is not coincidence." Her eyes scanned the jury carefully, and the subtle nods of understanding confirmed that her words were resonating. Rex shifted slightly, just enough to acknowledge the envelope of evidence in front of him. His head tilted, and a faint whine escaped his throat, barely audible, yet charged with significance. Those closest to him noticed immediately. The jurors whispered softly, pointing discreetly at the dog's subtle cues. Emily's lips parted, and her small voice echoed, "He's looking there." The room seemed to constrict, the air heavy with expectation. Every eye turned toward Rex as the dog slowly moved toward the evidence table, sniffing meticulously at each item in sequence. The quiet moment stretched on, almost unbearably. Emily's observations were precise, her recollections vivid. She described the scene, recalling small details, footprints, scattered objects, and subtle shifts in the defendant's behavior that most adults would have overlooked entirely. Her words, combined with the dog's instinctive responses, created an undeniable synergy. The courtroom leaned into the unfolding drama, captivated by this unusual, almost cinematic interplay between human and animal perception. Helen felt a shiver run down her spine as she watched her child. Emily's small face was a mixture of concentration and calm determination, eyes wide but unwavering. The stuffed rabbit in her hand seemed almost symbolic, grounding her in the world of childhood, even as she revealed truths that could shift the trajectory of the trial. The contrast between innocence and insight was palpable. Spectators and jurors alike were drawn into the spell, unable to look away. Whitman, realizing the shift in momentum, tried to regain control. He approached Emily with careful precision, asking questions meant to introduce doubt. "Emily, are you sure you saw all of this clearly?" he asked, lowering his voice to avoid startling her. "Sometimes things can look different when you're scared or nervous." Emily's gaze, unwavering, met his. "I saw it," she said firmly, her small voice carrying weight beyond her years. Her words were simple, but they resonated with an authority that even adults in the room could not ignore. She pointed again toward Rex, who remained poised but attentive, a silent witness to the child's truth. Marla approached cautiously, using the quiet moment to guide Emily toward elaborating further. "Emily," she said, "can you tell us anything else about that night? Anything at all that stood out to you?" The child paused, brow furrowed, recalling events with remarkable clarity. "He dropped something," she whispered, almost inaudibly, pointing toward the envelope on the table. "And Rex knows where it is." The courtroom froze. Everyone sensed the significance of the words. The dog's trained instincts had already aligned with Emily's observations, and now her testimony added a human confirmation. The combination of child perception and canine intuition created an undeniable chain of evidence that left spectators in awe. Whispered conversations erupted briefly before subsiding into attentive silence. Rex, sensing the cue, moved deliberately toward the evidence, sniffing carefully. His body language suggested recognition and alertness, and a faint tail wag acknowledged the small envelope she had indicated. The synergy between Emily and Rex was becoming undeniable. For the first time, spectators and jurors alike realized that a child's perception, combined with a trained dog's instincts, could reveal truths that adults had struggled to uncover for months. The judge observed silently, her keen eyes noting every detail. The quiet moment had become a pivotal interlude, a pause in the trial that emphasized observation over argument, instinct over assumption. Even the defendant seemed unsettled, his composure cracking ever so slightly. He shifted in his chair, glancing nervously at the little witness, and then at the dog. Emily, sensing the attention, straightened in her seat. Her small lips moved slightly as she whispered more details about what she had seen. She spoke of shadows, movements, and sounds with a precision that seemed almost photographic. The jury scribbled notes furiously, trying to capture every word, while the spectators remained captivated by the unfolding drama. The courtroom had entered a rare space where every observer felt the weight of the moment. Helen's hand remained firmly clasped around her daughter's. She could feel Emily's excitement and tension, and though she wanted to protect her, she knew this was something her child had to do. Emily had witnessed the crime firsthand, and now, in a courtroom full of adults and cameras, she was revealing her insight with clarity and courage. The quiet moment stretched further, seemingly suspended in time. Rex's gaze never left the evidence table, his body poised and alert. Emily's eyes mirrored his focus, creating a silent, almost imperceptible dialogue between them. No words were exchanged, but a connection was evident, a shared understanding of truth and observation that transcended human language. The jurors leaned forward collectively, captivated by this display. Lawyers, seasoned and confident, whispered quietly among themselves, trying to interpret the significance of a child's insight combined with a dog's instinct. Every observer in the courtroom understood, at a deep, almost intuitive level, that what they were witnessing was extraordinary. By the time the judge allowed a brief recess, the quiet moment had solidified into a turning point. Spectators rose, slowly from their seats, still whispering in astonishment. The child and the dog, side by side, had captured the attention and respect of everyone present. Emily returned to Helen's side, holding the stuffed rabbit tightly, her small chest rising and falling as she exhaled slowly. Rex remained poised near the evidence table, a silent guardian, observing the reaction of the courtroom. The quiet moment had done more than pause the trial. It had shifted the entire atmosphere. The energy of the courtroom had transformed from procedural tension to a shared anticipation, a recognition that a small voice and a loyal companion could reveal truths in ways that defied conventional expectation. Every person present, from jurors to spectators to attorneys, sensed that they were witnessing something historic, an extraordinary interlude where innocence, perception, and instinct had converged in perfect harmony. The courtroom's quiet tension was almost tangible. Every participant, from the jurors to the spectators in the gallery, seemed to hold their breath. Emily, small and resolute, sat clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes never leaving Rex, the black and tan canine. The dog remained poised near the evidence table, his gaze fixed on her with an uncanny intelligence. It was as if they shared a private understanding, invisible to everyone else, but deeply felt by those attuned to subtle cues. The prosecutor, Marla, recognized the moment for what it was: a junction between human observation and instinct, a bridge, connecting perception to proof. She stepped slightly forward, allowing the child's attention to remain undisturbed while guiding the jury's understanding. "Emily," she said softly, her voice calm yet firm, "can you tell us what Rex knows?" Emily's small lips parted. The room fell utterly silent. No whispers, no shuffling, no clicking of pens, just the weight of expectation pressing down on every person present. The little girl's finger extended slowly toward Rex, trembling slightly, as though even this simple gesture carried enormous significance. And then she spoke. "He knows," she said. The words were brief, barely 2 seconds long, yet their impact was seismic. A hushed gasp swept through the courtroom. Jurors froze, pencils hovering above paper, their minds struggling to process the simplicity and clarity of the statement. Spectators leaned forward, some covering their mouths in astonishment. The defendant stiffened in his chair, eyes widening slightly as his confident composure faltered. Even the judge, unflappable and experienced, paused, her pen poised mid-air. Studying the scene with rapt attention, Rex's ears twitched. His head tilted slightly, and his tail gave a subtle sweep, a canine nod of acknowledgement. The silent communication between the child and the dog was undeniable. Those who had dismissed Emily's testimony as the innocent ramblings of a small child now realized it was far more. Her words, paired with Rex's instincts, carried a weight that no human argument could easily counter. Marla, sensing the importance of timing, allowed the statement to resonate. She knew that forcing the moment too quickly could undermine its impact. Every eye in the room remained fixed on the pair, the child, and the dog. Even the courtroom staff, accustomed to procedure and protocol, seemed captivated by the simple elegance of the moment. The atmosphere had transformed from tense anticipation to reverent attention. The defense attorney, Whitman, stepped forward cautiously, attempting to regain some measure of control. "Emily," he said softly, his tone measured, "do you know?" "You mean? Can you explain what Rex knows?" The child's gaze didn't waver. She pointed once more toward the envelope on the evidence table. "He knows where it is," she said firmly. A collective intake of breath swept through the courtroom. The words resonated like a drumbeat, each repetition reinforcing the significance of her observation. The jury shifted forward in their seats, exchanging subtle glances. Every adult present recognized that these 2 words, spoken by a 6-year-old, had the power to redirect the focus of the trial. Rex moved with deliberate precision. He sniffed the evidence table methodically, scanning each item carefully. His movements were smooth, measured, and intentional. The slight wag of his tail, the tilt of his head, even the subtle lift of his paw conveyed acknowledgement, confirmation, and an unspoken alignment with Emily's statement. The synergy between child and dog was almost poetic, a quiet demonstration of instinct and perception intertwined. Spectators whispered softly, though their voices were drowned by the collective attention of the room. Some covered their mouths in astonishment, unable to reconcile the simplicity of the words with the weight of their implication. Marla stepped forward to reinforce the connection between Emily's testimony and Rex's behavior. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said carefully, "these are not coincidences. This dog reacts to evidence, and this child observed events directly. Their understanding aligns. This is a rare and critical moment in the pursuit of justice. Whitman, sensing the momentum slipping, tried to challenge the child's credibility, though his efforts seemed increasingly futile. "Emily, it's important to remember that memory can be tricky," he cautioned. "Sometimes we see things that didn't happen exactly as we remember." Emily's small voice cut through the courtroom with an unwavering clarity. "I saw it. He knows." The room froze again. There was no arguing with the quiet authority of her conviction. Jurors exchanged nervous glances, caught between the procedural weight of their duties and the undeniable impact of what they had just witnessed. Even the spectators, some of whom had attended countless trials, were captivated. The two words, "he knows," had shifted the dynamic of the entire case. The defendant shifted uneasily in his seat. His composure, carefully constructed over months of legal preparation, began to crack. He glanced at Rex, and then at Emily, his eyes narrowing. For the first time in the trial, a flicker of doubt and unease crossed his otherwise controlled expression. The canine's silent acknowledgement and the child's unwavering declaration had created a moment that challenged every assumption he had relied upon. Marla, aware of the moment's significance, allowed the courtroom to absorb the impact. She walked slowly toward the jury, ensuring that each juror understood the interplay between Emily's observation and Rex's trained instincts. "Consider this carefully," she said softly. "This is not conjecture. This is observation, alignment, and evidence coming together. These two words are small, but their implications are enormous." The quiet intensity of the courtroom was unlike anything anyone had anticipated. Even the court reporter, fingers poised over the keyboard, paused to ensure every word and nuance was captured. Cameras in the back of the courtroom clicked and whirred silently, documenting a moment that would undoubtedly make headlines. Spectators leaned forward, mesmerized. The trial had shifted from legal procedure to a theater of intuition, observation, and instinct. Rex's movements grew more precise. A dog sniffed the envelope on the table, pawed at it gently, and gave a subtle whine. The canine handler nodded in recognition. This was the behavior Rex had been trained to exhibit, yet it now carried an additional layer of meaning, a validation of the child's perception. Every observer could sense the convergence of instinct and observation, a rare phenomenon that transcended ordinary courtroom dynamics. Emily's lips parted again, and she added quietly, "He knows the truth." Her voice, small yet commanding, resonated through the courtroom. The effect was instantaneous. Jurors leaned forward, captivated. Spectators gasped softly. The judge, hands folded, nodded slightly, allowing the moment to unfold without interruption. Even the defendant seemed momentarily paralyzed, as though the simplicity and clarity of the child's words had bypassed rational defense strategies. Whitman, desperate to regain control, tried one last time to frame the statement as childlike. "Imagination." "Emily," he said cautiously, "are you sure you're not imagining things?" Emily's gaze fixed firmly on him. "No," she said with unwavering certainty. "I saw it. He knows. Rex knows." The courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. The weight of the two words had crystallized into a force that even adults could not ignore. The combination of the child's testimony and the canine's instinct had created a narrative that transcended traditional legal arguments. This was no longer simply a case of evidence and testimony. It had become a story of perception, intuition, and the undeniable clarity of observation. Marla stepped forward one last time, her voice gentle yet compelling. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "justice is often about uncovering truth, even in unexpected ways. Today, you have witnessed something extraordinary, a child's perception, aligning perfectly with trained instincts. These two words, simple yet profound, have opened a path to understanding that might otherwise have remained hidden. Rex's head tilted slightly, his body still but attentive. Emily's gaze never wavered, and the quiet connection between the two remained unbroken. The courtroom, collectively aware of the significance of the moment, absorbed the weight of the scene. For once, words were not enough to capture the full impact. Observation, instinct, and shared understanding spoke louder than any argument. As the judge called for a brief recess, the courtroom remained suspended in awe. Spectators whispered in amazement, jurors exchanged subtle nods, and even the defendant seemed uncertain how to proceed. Emily returned to her guardian's side, holding her stuffed rabbit tightly, while Rex remained poised near the evidence table. The two words, spoken with clarity and conviction, had stopped time in the courtroom. They had created a moment that would be remembered long after the trial concluded. The quiet, profound impact of those words was undeniable. Every person present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, the intersection of innocence, intuition, and trained instinct. The courtroom had frozen not in fear or confusion, but in recognition of a truth that transcended procedure and expectation. Two words, simple yet weighty, had transformed a room full of adults into witnesses of something almost miraculous. And as Emily sat quietly beside Helen, Rex set attention beside the evidence table, and the judge, prepared to guide the proceedings forward, the room held a shared understanding. This trial would never be the same again. A moment of clarity, of alignment between child and dog, had crystallized into a turning point, the significance of which would echo throughout the courtroom, the city, and the unfolding story of justice itself. The courtroom remained suspended, in disbelief for several seconds after Emily's words, "He knows," echoed through the room. Then, slowly, reactions began to ripple outward, subtle at first, then more pronounced. Jurors leaned forward in their seats, exchanging astonished glances, some scribbling notes furiously, while others simply stared, trying to process what had just occurred. Even the seasoned members of the press, positioned at the back with cameras poised, paused mid-click, realizing that they were capturing a moment unlike any they had ever witnessed. Spectators in the gallery whispered cautiously, some covering their mouths in awe. "Did you hear that?" One woman murmured to her companion. "A child and a dog," both confirming something that adults have been missing for months. A faint shiver of collective fascination ran through the room, mingled with disbelief. Many had come expecting a routine trial, perhaps some tension and drama, but nothing on this scale, nothing that involved a 6-year-old and a canine, literally shaping the narrative of justice. The defense attorney, Whitman, tried to regain control. His calm, practiced demeanor now showed cracks. He approached Emily cautiously, attempting to frame her testimony as unreliable due to her age. "Emily, are you absolutely sure about what you're saying?" he asked softly, leaning in, trying not to appear confrontational. But the child's gaze, unwavering and precise, met his head-on. "Yes," she said firmly, her small voice carrying an authority that defied her years. "I saw it. He knows." Whitman's face tightened. The room had shifted irrevocably. The canine Rex remained seated near the evidence table, ears pricked, body alert, yet composed. Every subtle movement he made seemed to validate Emily's observations. Even the jurors noticed. A slight paw lift, a tilt of the head, a soft whine each gesture, a confirmation of the child's perception. It was no longer a question of imagination or accident. The synergy between Emily and Rex was real, undeniable, and inescapable. The judge, a seasoned professional, accustomed to the high-stakes drama of the courtroom, remained composed outwardly, but allowed a subtle pause. Her eyes swept across the room, noting every reaction. She understood the implications of the moment, how a child's observation, aligned with a canine's trained instincts, could sway perception, influence judgment, and potentially change the outcome of the trial. The quiet pause allowed the room to absorb the gravity of the situation. Marla, the prosecutor, seized the opportunity to reinforce the significance of the moment. Her voice, calm but carrying weight, rose slightly above the murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, "you have just witnessed an extraordinary alignment. A child's perception and a trained canine's instincts have pointed to a truth that has been hidden until now. This is not mere coincidence. It is evidence, corroboration, and clarity combined in a way rarely seen." The courtroom's reaction intensified. Jurors exchanged quick glances, nodding subtly. Some scribbled notes furiously, while others sat in stunned silence, eyes fixed on the interplay between child and dog. The spectators in the gallery whispered in fascination, some barely daring to breathe. The defendant, who had appeared confident and composed for much of the trial, shifted uneasily in his seat. A faint tremor of uncertainty crossed his features. He realized that these two small forces, a child and a dog, had now become the center of attention, the pivot around which the trial might turn. Even the bailiff, usually a silent enforcer of order, paused briefly, recognizing the extraordinary nature of the moment. Cameras captured every nuance, the tilt of Rex's head, Emily's intense gaze, the ripple of recognition across the jurors' faces. The courtroom had become more than a place for legal argument. It had transformed into a stage where perception, instinct, and innocence converged to reveal truths that traditional methods had overlooked. A murmur began to spread among the spectators. "I've never seen anything like this," whispered one man to his companion. "It's like the child and the dog are speaking a language we don't understand." Another nodded, eyes wide, leaning forward. The realization that they were witnessing a unique moment of alignment, one that defied conventional expectations, was undeniable. Whitman attempted to regain authority. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his voice measured but carrying an edge of urgency, "we must be cautious. A child's memory can be imperfect. Dogs, while trained, do not understand context as humans do. This is important too. Remember when considering the weight of what you've just heard." Marla responded without missing a beat. "Yes, jurors, it's important to consider all evidence carefully," she said, her voice steady. "But the observation we've just witnessed is not trivial. It is precise, corroborated, and aligned with trained instincts. The implications are significant. This is more than a statement. It is a confirmation that may lead us to uncover truths previously overlooked." The canine handler, sensing the rising tension, gave Rex a subtle signal. The dog moved deliberately toward the evidence table, sniffing methodically and signaling the exact item Emily had indicated. The movement was slight, but deliberate, a paw lift and a nudge. Everyone watching understood the significance. The synergy between Emily and Rex had created a chain reaction of clarity, a confirmation that adults alone had struggled to achieve. Courtroom seemed to hum with anticipation. Every subtle reaction was amplified by the extraordinary circumstances. Jurors whispered softly, comparing their notes and observing the child's demeanor. Spectators leaned forward, eyes fixed on the law. Quiet yet intense interaction between the 6-year-old witness and the dog. The trial, which had already captured public attention, now teetered on the edge of something extraordinary. Convergence of observation and instinct that defied conventional expectation. The defendant's unease grew. His confidence, previously unshakable, wavered. He leaned slightly forward, eyes darting between Emily and Rex. He whispered something to Whitman, who responded with a terse nod, but the anxiety was evident. Even the calmest, most experienced participants in the courtroom recognized the magnitude of the moment. The small child and the trained dog had, in effect, created a silent force that demanded attention, reshaping the courtroom dynamic in real time. Emily's eyes, wide and unblinking, never left Rex. Her small hand gripped the stuffed rabbit, yet her posture exuded determination. She had seen something critical, and now, in this highly charged environment, her words were no longer mere recollections. They were guiding the focus of the entire courtroom. Rex, poised and attentive, mirrored her intent. It was a subtle yet powerful communication, a quiet but unmistakable signal to everyone present that the truth was being observed and acknowledged. The jurors leaned forward collectively, captivated. Notes were scribbled, whispers exchanged, and subtle nods given. They recognized that this moment carried implications far beyond the immediate testimony. Every subtle signal, the tilt of Rex's head, the precise movement toward the envelope, Emily's unwavering gaze formed a chain of evidence that challenged assumptions and demanded careful consideration. The judge finally spoke, her voice calm but resonant. "We will take a brief recess," she said. "This will allow all parties to collect their thoughts and consider the observations we have just witnessed." Her words carried weight, yet even as she announced the recess, the energy of the room remained charged. Spectators remained seated, whispers continuing softly. Jurors leaned forward, some exchanging thoughtful glances. The child's testimony and the canine's demonstration had left an indelible mark. Helen, holding Emily's hand, felt a mixture of relief and awe. Her daughter had performed beyond anyone's expectations, demonstrating clarity, courage, and insight. The stuffed rabbit, gripped tightly in Emily's other hand, seemed almost symbolic, a bridge between childhood innocence and the profound truth she had just conveyed. Emily's small body radiated confidence, her presence commanding attention. Far beyond her years, Rex remained poised near the evidence table, ears pricked, tail subtly moving, observing the room. The canine handler gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. The synergy between child and dog had created an unspoken understanding within the courtroom. It was a rare alignment of perception and instinct that had captured the attention of everyone present. As the courtroom began to disperse for recess, murmurs continued. Spectators whispered about what they had witnessed. Jurors discussed their notes quietly, and journalists prepared to document the unprecedented moment. Even the defendant and his attorney remained seated, exchanging tense, hushed words. The ripple effect of Emily's 2 words, "He knows," had extended far beyond their simplicity, touching every person in the room and altering the tone of the trial. The quiet, electrifying moment had passed, but its effects lingered. Everyone understood that what they had witnessed was extraordinary. The alignment of innocence and instinct, the confirmation of truth through the eyes of a child, and the senses of a trained K9. The courtroom, now buzzing with discussion and anticipation, was forever changed. This ripple of reactions would continue to shape the trial, guiding perceptions and influencing interpretations. The 2 words spoken by Emily had created a seismic shift, forcing all present to reconsider assumptions, re-evaluate evidence, and pay close attention to subtleties that might have previously been overlooked. The courtroom, once a place of routine proceedings, had transformed into a stage where perception, instinct, and clarity intersected in a profoundly unforgettable way. The courtroom reconvened after the brief recess, but the energy remained charged, electric, and almost tangible. Everyone knew that the moment Emily had spoken those 2 words, "He knows," had changed the trial in ways that no one could have anticipated. Jurors returned to their seats with sharpened focus, whispering quietly among themselves, comparing notes, and replaying the events of the morning in their minds. Spectators leaned forward eagerly, their fascination unbroken, as if the trial had shifted from a procedural necessity into a live demonstration of perception and instinct. Rex, The black and tan canine remained near the evidence table, his posture poised and deliberate. His body language was calm, yet intense, ears pricked, muscles subtly tensed, as though anticipating a moment of action. The handler adjusted his stance slightly, signaling the dog to remain attentive while maintaining discipline. Every subtle movement Rex made drew attention from jurors, spectators, and even the defendant, whose confident composure had been noticeably shaken by the child's testimony earlier. Emily, small but resolute, returned to the witness stand. Her guardian, Helen, offered a reassuring nod, which Emily met with a steady gaze. Today, her role was no longer merely a witness recounting memories. She had become a guide, helping the courtroom navigate through the subtleties of instinct, perception, and evidence. The stuffed rabbit she clutched seemed almost symbolic, grounding her in her childhood even as she participated in a situation charged with tension, significance, and public scrutiny. Marla, the prosecutor, rose with calm authority, understanding that the next steps were critical. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of precision and patience, "we have a trained canine with us today, Rex, who has already demonstrated the ability to detect evidence crucial to this case. We also have Emily, who witnessed the incident directly and has provided insight beyond her years. We will now demonstrate the alignment between her observations and Rex's trained instincts, revealing evidence in real time." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Observers leaned forward in anticipation, while the defendant shifted uneasily, whispering something to Whitman, his defense attorney. There was a palpable tension in the air, the kind that arises when a revelation is imminent, when everyone senses that the truth is about to become impossible to ignore. The canine handler crouched slightly, giving Rex a subtle signal. The dog moved deliberately toward the evidence table, sniffing methodically. His gaze flicked briefly toward Emily, as if seeking confirmation, and she nodded ever so slightly, her small finger pointing toward the critical envelope she had earlier identified. The connection was quiet, almost imperceptible, yet the courtroom seemed to sense it. A silent alignment between human insight and canine instinct. Rex's movements were precise. He sniffed at each piece of evidence with meticulous care, pawing lightly at some items, pausing at others, and finally signaling directly toward the envelope Emily had indicated. The canine's body language was unmistakable, a clear, deliberate indication that the item held significance. Jurors exchanged startled glances, and spectators whispered in astonishment. Even the court reporter paused briefly, capturing every subtle nuance of the interaction. Emily leaned slightly forward on the stand. Her gaze remained fixed on Rex, observing his responses with the keen focus of someone who understood what she had witnessed. "That's it," she whispered softly, barely audible, yet the weight of her voice carried throughout the room. "That's what he dropped. That's what proves it." Marla approached the jury slowly, her calm voice guiding their understanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, the alignment you are witnessing is extraordinary, but critical. Emily's observations are being confirmed in real time by a trained canine. This is evidence that could otherwise have remained undiscovered. The child has seen the events clearly, and Rex's instincts are corroborating her testimony. The implications are profound." The defendant shifted in his seat, unease evident in every movement. Whitman attempted to maintain composure, leaning in to whisper instructions, but the tension was palpable. The synergy between Emily and Rex had created a dynamic beyond mere legal argument. It was a convergence of perception, instinct, and truth. Even seasoned courtroom veterans recognized the uniqueness of the moment, understanding that the ordinary rules of persuasion had been eclipsed by the alignment of extraordinary observation and instinct. Rex's behavior intensified subtly. He sniffed around the envelope again, pawed at it with deliberate precision, and gave a soft whine of recognition. His gaze flicked toward Emily once more, acknowledging her guidance. The room seemed to hold its breath, collectively aware that the dog's instincts were providing verification that human observation alone could not achieve. The jurors, taking careful notes, leaned forward, their eyes wide with astonishment. Emily spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. "That's where he hid it. That's the truth." The simplicity of her words belied their power. Every person in the courtroom, from the judge to the spectators, felt the weight of her declaration. It was more than testimony. It was a revelation, magnified by the validation of the canine's trained instincts. The judge, experienced and deliberate, observed closely. Her eyes swept across the jury, noting reactions and body language. She understood the significance of what was unfolding. A child's memory, precise and unwavering, combined with the instinct of a trained animal, had created a unique confirmation of evidence. It was a rare moment in legal history, one where observation and instinct surpassed traditional methods, demanding attention and consideration. Marla guided Emily to describe the scene further. The little girl recounted details of the incident with remarkable precision: objects displaced, subtle movements, shadows, and the sequence of actions taken by the defendant. Every detail she provided was met with acknowledgement from Rex, whose behavior mirrored her observations. Paw lifts, head tilts, and subtle body shifts served as validation of her testimony. The courtroom seemed to vibrate with anticipation, each person realizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Whitman attempted another objection, citing potential unreliability due to age and circumstance. "Your Honor, we must consider whether a child's perception can truly serve as credible evidence," he argued, his tone calm but strained. The judge, attentive and measured, responded firmly. "The court recognizes the unusual circumstances, including the demonstration of corroborating instincts from a trained canine. The testimony will be considered in context, and jurors are instructed to weigh all evidence presented carefully." The room's tension did not abate. Spectators whispered among themselves, noting the unprecedented nature of the proceedings. Journalists at the back of the courtroom recorded every gesture, every subtle movement, and every word, fully aware that this would be a story of historic significance. The alignment of child and canine was being documented in real time, capturing the attention of everyone present. Emily's final observation of the moment was clear and concise. He knew it was hidden. He knew someone would find it. Her words carried a clarity that resonated beyond her age. They were statements of fact, reinforced by the canine's instincts and behavior. The courtroom collectively absorbed the magnitude of her declaration. Jurors nodded subtly, while spectators whispered in awe. Even the defendant's composure had reached its limit. A flicker of fear passed over his face. Marla stepped forward to summarize the moment for the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, the synergy between observation and instinct is rare but undeniable. Emily has seen the events firsthand. Rex, trained to detect evidence, has confirmed her observations through his behavior. Together, they provide a clear and compelling alignment of facts that cannot be ignored. This is not coincidence. This is revelation through instinct and observation." Rex, calm but precise, returned to his position near the evidence table, maintaining a posture of alert attention. Emily's small frame exuded quiet confidence, her eyes reflecting the gravity of the moment. The synergy between them had created a turning point, of revelation that transcended ordinary expectations of courtroom procedure. Every subtle motion, every word, and every glance carried significance, solidifying the impact of the moment for all present. The jurors remained captivated. Every note taken, every glance exchanged, and every whispered discussion reflected their awareness that the trial had entered uncharted territory. Spectators leaned forward, eager to witness the next development. Even the defendant appeared unsettled, his confidence replaced by a growing unease as he observed the undeniable alignment of child and canine. By the time the session concluded for a brief recess, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Everyone present understood that the revelation through Rex had created a seismic shift in the trial. Emily's testimony, now reinforced by the K9's trained instincts, had introduced a new dynamic, one that demanded careful consideration, respect, and acknowledgement. The quiet synergy of perception and instinct had transformed ordinary proceedings into something extraordinary. The courtroom was forever changed, witnesses to a moment where innocence, intuition, and trained instinct converged to reveal truths that might otherwise have remained hidden. Jurors, spectators, and even the defendant were forced to reckon with the extraordinary reality of the child and canine alignment. As Emily returned to Helen's side, clutching her stuffed rabbit, and Rex remained poised near the evidence table, the ripple effects of the revelation were clear. The courtroom had been reoriented. The trial would proceed with new focus, new energy, and a heightened awareness of the profound alignment between child and canine. The revelation through Rex had set the stage for the climactic events yet to unfold, leaving everyone in suspense and anticipation. The air in the courtroom was electric, thick with anticipation, as the proceedings resumed after the previous revelations. Every person present, jurors, attorneys, spectators, and even the court staff, felt the weight of the extraordinary events that had unfolded. Emily, small and poised, sat at the witness stand, gripping her worn stuffed rabbit with one hand, and holding herself with a quiet resolve that belied her age. Across the room, Rex, the black and tan canine, remained alert and attentive near the evidence table, every muscle in his body taut, ears pricked, tail flicking ever so slightly in anticipation. The judge, a composed woman with decades of courtroom experience, surveyed the room with measured patience. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, took in every subtle movement, the way jurors leaned forward, how the spectators whispered in barely audible tones, and the small, unwavering gaze of Emily directed at Rex. She understood the significance of the moment. The trial had shifted from the conventional presentation of evidence to something far more profound, a convergence of perception, instinct, and truth. Marla, the prosecutor, stepped forward with calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice soft but resonant, "we are about to witness something rare. Emily has observed the events firsthand. Rex, trained to detect evidence, has responded to her guidance. Together, they will reveal truths that have long remained hidden. Please pay close attention." The murmurs in the courtroom hushed. Even the defendant, seated with Whitman at his side, leaned slightly forward, his face a mask of restrained anxiety. The confidence he had maintained throughout the trial was beginning to crack, replaced by a subtle, gnawing unease. Every person in the room sensed that the climax of this extraordinary narrative was approaching. The K9 handler signaled to Rex, who moved deliberately toward the evidence table, sniffing each item with meticulous precision. His movements were fluid, controlled, and purposeful. Every subtle motion, paw lifts, head tilts, soft whines, seemed to communicate a silent narrative, one that the adults in the room could observe but not fully translate. Emily's gaze followed every movement, her small finger occasionally pointing to items on the table, guiding the canine with quiet authority. "Emily," Marla prompted softly, crouching to the child's level, "can you tell us what Rex is indicating?" The courtroom held its collective breath. Emily's voice, clear and unwavering, cut through the tension. "That one," she said, pointing to a sealed envelope that had been sitting innocuously among other pieces of evidence. "That's what he dropped. That's the truth." The room froze. Jurors leaned forward in unison, pens hovering above notebooks. Spectators whispered in stunned disbelief. Even Whitman, attempting to maintain composure, felt a chill creep down his spine. The defendant's face drained of color as he instinctively leaned back in his chair, eyes darting nervously between Emily and Rex. Rex approached the envelope with deliberate steps, sniffing carefully. He pawed at it lightly, tilted his head, and let out a soft, affirmative whine. The subtle gestures were unmistakable, a clear, deliberate indication that the item was significant. The canine handler allowed the dog to signal freely, understanding that every movement carried weight, and that the courtroom was watching this extraordinary collaboration unfold in real time. Emily leaned forward slightly, her small voice barely above a whisper. "He knows," she said again, this time with emphasis, as if the two words carried the accumulated weight of the morning's revelations. "Rex knows. He knows the truth." The courtroom froze completely. Time seemed to suspend itself. Every eye was locked on the child and the dog. Even the judge, whose life in the courtroom had accustomed her to tense moments, allowed herself a brief pause, absorbing the gravity of what she had just witnessed. This was no longer simply testimony. It was revelation, validation, and confrontation, all condensed into a quiet moment of astonishing clarity. The jurors' pens had stopped moving. Their eyes were wide, fixed on Emily's small form and Rex's poised frame. Every whisper in the gallery had ceased. Spectators were frozen in mid-breath, as though acknowledging that the unfolding scene was too significant to interrupt. Even the defendant seemed caught in a suspended reality, unable to respond, a flicker of fear in his eyes betraying the tension that had built over the months of trial. Marla, sensing the critical weight of the moment, allowed the silence to linger. She knew that rushing the narrative could diminish the impact of what was occurring. She stepped slightly aside, giving the child and the canine the stage, allowing their actions and words to resonate fully. The canine handler gave a subtle cue. Rex moved deliberately to the envelope Emily had indicated, sniffing and pawing gently to confirm its significance. His behavior was precise, methodical, and undeniable. Every observer, from jurors to spectators, could perceive the unspoken communication between child and dog, a silent collaboration that spoke of truth, instinct, and observation far beyond ordinary human testimony. Emily's gaze followed Rex. Intently, she whispered once more, her voice soft but resolute. "That's it. That's what proves everything." He tried to hide it, but Rex knows. "I know. The truth is here." The courtroom collectively exhaled, though not audibly. The tension that had gripped the room since the morning's testimony reached its apex. Spectators leaned forward, some gripping the edges of their seats, as though their physical connection to reality might help them process the extraordinary events before them. Jurors remained motionless, pens still poised above notebooks, taking in the undeniable weight of the child's words and the dog's instincts.